Welcome to the GSMC Pets Podcast, the show that caters to pet lovers of all kinds. We'll talk about pets on social media, pets doing amazing things, and how to take care of the pets in your life. Whether your pet is a dog, a cat, a llama, hamster, reptile, or something more exotic, you'll find educational and entertaining information on the GSMC Pets Podcast.
To the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex Fletches. Now, I'm sure if you've been on social media for the last few days, and I'm pretty sure most of us have, considering the circumstances, then you might have seen this adorable little video going around of a little puppy dog that got into some red strawberry jam and then just decided to take a nap on the floor. And everyone was surprised because it looked like the dog had a serious accident, but as it turned out, it was just a hungry little pup who just knows how to live its life to the best. And I honestly think that's one of the best things to come out of like anything in the last few days, weeks, whatever. Because honestly, I think we all just needed that kind of laugh. And then that specific event really did get me thinking about how much personality that animals really can have. And personality is honestly one of the best things about animals. You know, they could be of the same species, the same genus, you know, kingdom, all that stuff, but even if they're the two of the same type of animals, one can have such a huge personality and another can be a lot more reserved and have a quieter personality. But that's the same for people, isn't it? So what exactly happens when people and animals sort of meet in the middle? And of course, as you know me, I'm a big nerd. And because I'm a big nerd, I like to talk about things like video games and movies and such. And since, you know, video games are obviously big and a lot of us are inside right now, well, there's been a pretty big release right now of video games. And right now, the latest game, Animal Crossing New Horizons, just came out, and I felt like that was a perfect game to really talk about, not because of gameplay or because of there's something that I think you all would get from this, but rather how interesting it is, how aside from you being the only person in the game, every resident of this series is an animal, and there's a lot of different species involved in this game, a lot, like more than I recall there being. And what's fascinating about this is not only are these, you know, creatures, these characters, different animals, but they're some of the same species that have vastly different designs and vastly different personalities that I actually did want to discuss about too. So with everything going on, I figured something nice and lighthearted would be perfect to talk about. And I just kind of wanted to go over that and sort of share some real life comparisons as well. Because going over everything, if I'm reading this correctly, it says that there are about, well, let me put it this way. There's much more than 20 characters. But there's quite a lot of animals, and it goes by at least, there's definitely more than 50 characters. And along with that, there's a few of each different species as well. And since we're talking about dogs, I think it's fun to look at some of the different dog creatures in this game, and some of them may have differing, you know, color palettes. I mean, there's no red dogs, or there's no, you know, super colorful pink dogs, but there are, you know, there are actually some dogs that are very reminiscent, because these are real breed dogs. From what I'm looking at, there are actually some such as pit bulls, and I believe Dobermans in this game. But what I actually do love, if you know Animal Crossing at all, one of, if not the most beloved mascot of Animal Crossing is the lovable, always helpful, eager to get work done Isabelle, who is actually a Shih Tzu. probably one of the most common indoor house breeds of dogs. Long hair, usually blonde, little pocket dogs a lot of people have. But Isabelle is actually very interesting as well, simply because she is attentive, she's very helpful, and the personality traits a lot of these characters get are actually based off of the type of animal they are, and just how interesting it is that these characters are interpreted one-to-one. So what I find interesting about characters like this are simply that, looking at the design, these designs have a very cartoony, anime, almost toyish design, but they're super adorable. But even some of the characters that have outrageous designs, like a red frog or, a green hippo, they still actually do have some real world etymology to it that I really wanted to, go and talk about as well, and why this is so interesting. Animal Crossing has been around for quite a while, and I thought it would be fun to just kind of get to talk about it, because I myself am heavily involved right now. And if you're just curious about me, at the moment, in my game, I have 2 villagers. One is named Dom, who's actually a new character, who's a ram, and the other's name is Fuchsia. I actually trying to remember what Fuchsia is, because Fuchsia is sort of an interesting case. Apparently, she's a deer, but looking at her, she looks almost like a dog sort of character, and she's a pink deer. And that's sort of one of those differing designs I'm talking about, is that the character looks like a very cartoony, a very, sort of, I guess the word would be sort of like a very, anime, very out there design, but her design is actually very standoffish. It's very, nice. It's interesting design, and it's actually based off of the does as well. So it actually there are male deer in here as well that actually will have big antlers and more rustic design. So this one seems based more off of a North American doe, which is pretty interesting on how well it does represent the character it points out. When you stop and look at it, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. There's also some characters that are deers that are also, say, elk, or even some that are more on the, that are a little more on the design of, like, say, let's see here. I'm trying to remember the name of this one here, but it's actually looks like it's based more off of a more African, let's say, one of the ones located in Africa, gazelle. There we go. It's based more off of a gazelle, but it falls more into the same category. So rather than just giving copy and pasted characters, each one has their own unique style and personality that I find really cool. For example, a character that might be based off of more of a North American deer might have more of a American or fashionist style, whereas a elk has more of a rustic, almost country-like design. And it's interesting how much thought is put into some of these characters, and that's why I really enjoy a game like this. I may have talked about Pokemon quite a lot, but Animal Crossing is definitely something fun if you are an animal fan, if you enjoy social interaction, especially right now while that might be sort of scarce, and if you like some pretty fun and quirky characters. One of the best things about this game also is the ability to catch wildlife, fish, bugs, and even dig up fossils. So if you enjoy any of that, there is a lot to do, and it's actually really great for animal lovers, because it's called Animal Crossing. And I want to talk more about these guys in just a minute, but I will say that I also do really enjoy my character Dom, because he is a very energetic little ram, or rather a sheep. I believe he's a ram because he has big curly horns. Very sweet character, but he's also, despite how sweet and pudgy he looks, he's actually a jock, so he's very into fitness and working out, which is kind of fun because he looks like he's more of a slow-taking character, but what's interesting about it is that it actually does make sense because of the type of sheep he is. It actually does look more like he's a more juvenile ram, so it's actually really interesting. Some of them take on more sheepish appearances, but he's more of a young ram. So him having more of a prowess for fitness and exercise does make sense, which is pretty cool when you really stop and think about it and how different some of these characters are. That's why it's so much fun, and it makes me smile when I learn something a little bit new about some of these characters. But we're going to take a quick break. I know I kind of went on right there about Animal Crossing, but it's a lot of fun. Can you blame me? And I'm going to have more animal facts and relating real life to video games in just a minute. But until then, please enjoy these messages.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Back. Thanks for holding on tight, guys. I hope you're ready because the villagers have arrived. So, as we were discussing, Animal Crossing is a very fascinating, very enriching game involving both real-life simulations and fun fantasy simulations involving humanoid animals that have borrowed a lot of inspiration from both real animals and fun personality quirks. So, I discussed some of them already, and I wanted to continue on with it. So, as I've already mentioned, a lot of these animals, while having very cartoony, anime-esque designs, things that feel like you'd be watching a children's storybook or a cartoon anywhere, these characters have very interesting ways and inspirations. Now, obviously, they might have some fun personalities, fashionistas, you may have sleepy characters, sporty characters. You have very fun, quirky characters. And sometimes these actually reflect their personality or their original species as well. So I wanted to address some of them as well, some of my favorites, and some that I found were pretty interesting. For example, there may be a bunch of certain animal types, such as cats or even eagles. However, there's only a few bird villagers. Now, bird and eagles are obviously birds, but they're different varieties. The birds we have already, just from looking at them in the newest game, is definitely about 3 of them, and each one has pretty obvious inspirations. It looks like there is a sparrow, a blue jay or a fletchling, and what looks like a green green parakeet. So these are 3 obviously different characters, but it's interesting because they each have vastly different personalities. If you look at a green parakeet, his name is Jitters, by the way, a lot of times his personality type seems to be more of a jock, despite the fact that he looks like he'd be more of a sort of quirky character. So it's interesting how some of these characters can be interpreted that way. Along with that, Sparrow and Jay, which obviously he's a blue jay, is pretty obvious in design. These are 3 drastically looking different birds. They're just obviously going to differ, but there's only 3 of them. However, when I said there's a reduced mounts, I mean, there's only 1 bull villager. And it's pretty interesting how when it comes to certain animals, there may only be 1 or 2 of them. But this one right here, the only bull is named Angus, and he obviously looks like a pretty typical bull, maybe like a standard bull you'd see in America. And what actually makes me laugh about this character's design is that this character is wearing a black t-shirt with a flame design on it, and his name's Angus. So my guess is that it's just kind of a joke on Angus beef and stuff like that, which is really great too. That's honestly really fun. And also, if you've never played this game, there are a lot of puns and jokes in this game, and that's honestly one of the best parts of it, is because these aren't just normal puns. Some of them are really smart, really well made puns too. Some of them are simple puns and references to other properties in that series, but some of them are really impressive insights to the animal species. Some of the best puns or information you'll actually find are when you actually catch animals, specifically bugs and fish. A lot of times when you catch fish, you may learn that species name. You may learn things such as where that fish actually comes from, and even, this is one of the coolest parts, when you catch fish or bugs, there is actually a timer or a sort of scale that tells you what time of the year you might find this best at, what time of the day, in what season. So there are actually seasonal variants as well. So while I might be finding a lot of black bass or black bass and sea bass right now because it's almost springtime, if I go wait until winter or summer, I probably will start finding other types of animals and fish and bugs. So that's actually really fun because it's actually pretty reminiscent of real life and migration patterns. So that's also another point in detail I have to give to this kind of game. Along with that, I also have to give a lot of really fun detail to some of the other designs. For example, there's only 2 cow villagers, but they're obviously based off of male and female cows rather than anything else. The typical black and white dairy cow, and then the brown male cow. Now, I did say there was already a bull, so if this is a cow, it technically would be a female cow, and it does seem like what they're steering towards. But cows don't have a ton of variations, but using these 2 in contrast is actually really smart and interesting. However, then there's a bunch of others, like, again, the deer villagers or the eagle villagers, which have almost 10. But there are some interesting ones out here. Duck villagers only have 2 variations, one of which looks like it's a whistling duck, and the other one looks like it might be a woodwind duck, or I believe it's a wood duck. So rather than using stuff like a mallard or a green-headed duck, they only seem to use these 2 brown duck designs, which, nothing wrong with that. I think there have been some other colored duck heads in the past, but these seem like the 2 they decided to bring in this time around. Along with that, they all have interesting personalities, and even things like their designs, their eyes actually reflect a lot about their personality. And that's really fun about this game. There are also certain characters that I want to get into in a little while, but I'm going to avoid talking about those right now because they have some interesting lore that deserve their own segment. But on top of that, we even have some interesting frog combos. Now, if you remember anything from my previous episodes, I have mentioned frogs and other reptiles or amphibians and their color. Color being that a normal amphibian or reptile will usually have pretty standard colors, your greens, your browns, and that'll be about it. They're pretty standard. But for specially designed creatures, they might have really out there designs such as bright reds, bright blues, purples on occasions, and these are made to designate and say, we're dangerous, don't eat us, don't touch us, otherwise you'll get poisoned. And I think this is pretty interesting because I did mention red, but I don't know if I ever mentioned the fact that there are, yes indeed, red frogs. So the poison dart frog is probably one of the most famous examples of a poisonous, dangerous creature known for its color. And in Animal Crossing, we do have 2 frog villagers. One simply being Lily, who looks like a pretty standard depiction of a frog. Bright green skin, yellow underbelly, and red cheeks. But then we have what looks like Drift, who he is kind of has a race car motif for some reason, but he's also a jock type, so that kind of does make sense too. However, he's got a red and orange color with black spots, and this is actually real colors of a poison dart frog. Typically, poison dart frogs aren't just one color, but they'll usually be a one color and black with black spots combination, which actually does work well for this character. So I find that to be another point in some realism for these character designs. On top of that, I will also say one of the coolest things about this game are some of the attention to the plant life in this game as well. So I actually planted a thing of flowers yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, and they're still not fully grown. Not because of lack of attention, but because there is a real-world time aspect to this game. There is a lot of ins and outs to the Animal Crossing series that is fascinating and almost parallel back to real life. Now, if you yourself find that you're interested in animals, I've always suggested take a trip to your backyard. Maybe take a trip to a local pond or something, and you can find some of these creatures. However, if you're not able to get around, maybe you're stuck inside, maybe you're in the city, so you have no way to actually go and explore and do these things with animals, Animal Crossing is a really great way to get involved and get an interest for animals, to learn more about them, to get into the aspect of exploring and learning and seeing what's going out there. Animal Crossing is a really great way to get involved in that sort of hobby. So if you have the ability to, I recommend checking it out, because it's definitely one of those type of series that I would play in the event that I can't get out into the real world and see animals. Or perhaps I don't want to deal with tarantulas that'll chase me in the real world, so instead I'll just play with them virtually. But regardless about hypothetical tarantulas and whatnot, let's talk about something that's real. A quick word from our sponsors. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So we've been talking about game Animal Crossing and how it just recently released, and how we're also talking about a lot of the animals, their real-life companions and counterparts, along with a lot of the real inspiration and influences you can do. So let's quickly talk about a few more villagers and some of their fun inspirations. So one that I found was pretty interesting was actually the horse villagers. So horses can vary in appearances. A lot of them have different influences, such as, if you've ever seen any type of horse, you might see the typical race horse, which we actually do have in Victoria, who actually has a very sporty motif, even with a mask on her, as well as having more of a peppy design. And this is actually pretty interesting simply because it obviously signifies that she's a racehorse, and a brown racehorse, which is, very common. Along with that, we still have some other ones, including actually Roscoe, who is a black horse, midnight black, has a sort of dark motif going on to it, which is fairly common to happen in horses, having, completely black structure as well. But then we also have Savannah, who is a zebra. While technically not completely a horse, but a sort of branch of the horse, family. It is actually interesting that instead of putting it in her own category, she's part of the horse category. And again, there are a lot of characters who take inspiration from different cultures. So you may have characters who come from or are part of a different family, but they usually come from some of their culture. And then one of our more interesting characters is, again, one of those characters I've mentioned who look like they come out of a cartoon or an anime, is Julian. Julian, who is very interesting because he not only has a fun design, he's also got more of a smug, uptight personality, so he's very, kind of full of himself. He's kind of got a fashion design going on to him, and Julian is actually rather than a horse, he's a blue horse with a horn. That's right, he's a blue unicorn. So it's kind of fun how they would take that and turn it into a character ideal, a character, sort of structure, which is pretty cool. I find it really interesting and entertaining when they do stuff with characters like that, sort of putting we have realistic horses, let's put something fantasy involved as well, and let's sort of make that reflect their personalities. On top of that, though, Animal Crossing has some of the more interesting mechanics of any game. Personally, as I've already said several times, I'm a huge fan of the Pokemon game series, simply because, like Animal Crossing, it's sort of about collecting an etymology of animals. However, in Animal Crossing, you actually do get to collect real animals such as fish, bugs, and even fossils. Pokemon, you get to do something similar where you pretty much catch every Pokemon to fill up a Pokedex and pretty much categorize and learn more about each pocket monster. Now, the difference is that obviously these are real fish or sort of somewhat real fish. And then there are pocket monsters, which are based off of real things but have more of a fantasy element to them that you use to battle. What is fun about both of these games is that they do sort of encourage exploration and learning about the etymology. So I'm not going to go all the way back to the Pokemon etymology right now because it's so much. But with Animal Crossing, some of the best variety you'll get are from the villagers you run into and the personalities that follow. Simply because you won't get to see mice, monkeys, ostriches, penguins in the wild in this game. Rather, they're the villagers you make friends with. But what will be fun is that all the animals you do catch, the fish and the bugs and all the fossils you find, do go into a museum that you actually get to go in and explore and look at as well. That's honestly a really fun reward. Not only are you getting to explore a really amazing free museum, but you get to help contribute to it. So that is also a really, really great take for this game. Now, I have taken some time to talk about a lot of the fantasy elements and a lot of the fun characters, but I haven't taken a lot of time to talk about some of the non-playable characters that you see very frequently. There are quite a lot of them. I think definitely there are some pretty great ones, such as there's Gulliver, who is multiple layered in his references. Gulliver being both a sea captain who actually has a team that he works with to help rescue people, but at the same time, it's basically like their version of the Air Force or Navy, because he actually dresses up like Donald Duck in a Navy outfit. But he also is a huge reference to the book Gulliver's Travels. Especially in any game you meet Gulliver, he finds himself washed up on the seashore, just like in the book Gulliver's Travels, which is honestly a really fun reference. Did I also mention this game has a lot of funny references and puns? This game is full of them. And if you are not a pun fan, you won't like this game, but this game has so many puns. Like, personally, one of my favorites is if you catch a black bass, a black bass, sorry, I get those two, but if you catch a black bass, then it'll say, the black bass, the most metal of all fish. And I love puns and stuff like that. And there's so many of them, some which you may just, like, groan, some of them you may actually get a pretty hard laugh from. But that's some of the enjoyment of this game. This game has so much personality. It has a lot of fun fantasy characters and fun references. I will say that one of the more interesting parts of the game will also be some of the deeper lore and character interactions you will have. There's an experience when it comes to spending time outside and getting to spend time with people. So when it comes to spending time outside, when it comes to spending time outside, there's nothing that beats walking around, running into animals, seeing something interesting happen. I get to walk right into my backyard, and there are fish and some birds and a lot of like sort of forest area that I can explore and see a lot of animals. Just earlier today, I saw some crows chasing down a hawk because that actually helped me realize, oh yeah, they do that because of like they're not strong enough to take on a hawk by themselves, and all a hawk has to really do is fly up a little bit higher, and the crows can't keep up because crows don't soar, they fly. But hawks, they take like 2 flaps and they're flying way farther and faster than a crow will, and sometimes they have to protect prey or have to protect their own because hawks do eat smaller birds of prey. Well, maybe not even birds of prey, just smaller birds. But with this game, you get a really great satisfaction of exploration, and sort of both the funs and the dangers of the outdoors that are sort of like, I never thought of it that way. That is a great way to explore the world. I mean, one of the main ones is that if you spend enough time outside, if you develop a habit of digging and really getting into the dirt, you'll find bugs, but you'll also find buried treasures, and that can lead to sort of pretty great things when you take the time and you start learning how to look. Excavation, paleontology, and you essentially get to be a small paleontologist for a while. And that is honestly some of the fun. Is almost like you're getting to try out different hobbies to see if that could be a career, or if anything, it's also a way to make money. But it does sort of tie back into the aspect of, this is something I constantly try to educate people on, is explore, get to learn more about the world, and really get to see what's out there. Because if you learn more about the world, you learn more about animals, then you really get to learn more about how the world works. And that's one of the best things you could ever do, is learn more about the world, and learn more about animals, because that's honestly one of our best resources. It's one of the best things we have going for us, and we don't know much, we don't do much, or we don't really take care of the animals simply because we don't know. People fear what we don't know, but all it takes is a quick search and a little experience out there. And speaking of a quick time, we're going to take another quick break with these words from our sponsors, so please just stay tuned. I hope you enjoy, and we'll be right back.
Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Guys, today we are talking about the game series Animal Crossing, a lot of its real-world influences, and just how good this game might be for you if you are interested in wildlife and really getting to know what's out there for you. Now, I assume you've been listening this whole time, because if you just jumped in randomly halfway, then what the heck? I need to go back and re-listen. But, as I've said previously in this episode, this game is full of puns. One of my personal favorites I found is, I caught a honeybee. Ah, sweet success. I love how silly this game is. And especially a lot of the influences that some of these characters have, both, in the real world, but also culturally. One other thing you should know about me is I'm a big cultural fan. I love culture, when it comes to other inspired multimedia. You could just go ahead and represent a culture in media. Oh, look, you created a fantasy world that's kind of based out of like ye olde England or whatever. Sure, that's fine. But whenever there's culture mixed into a lore, it becomes more interesting to me because you get a little taste of that culture in a fun, creative way. Now, I've said how different some of these villagers are. One that I find is very interesting but only has a small amount of characters are the octopus villagers, who are very interesting. I've already said how cool octopi are in a previous episode, but I will probably follow up with that later in another episode. But rather than go for any serious traditional octopi, such as, standard deep sea octopi or anything else, they actually went for a more cultural route that I found more interesting. Now, Animal Crossing is a video game based out of a lot of Japanese culture. And if you know much about Japanese culture, octopi are very important, especially when it comes to food. Now, there are three. There's Marina, who seems to be just sort of a pretty typical pink octopi, sort of a cartoon mascot. Nothing too special. However, these octopi do have something. Marina seeming to be more based off of Japanese sort of fashion out there. Definitely having a big character play. But then we also have two others of Octavian and Zucker. So I'm going to talk about these two for just a minute. So Octavian is interesting. His design itself just kind of look like a big red puffy octopi. Looks like he's kind of angry. In fact, he does have a cranky nature. But what's interesting about this character, besides looking pretty mad, having puffy sort of lips, is that this character, you wouldn't really think an octopi just to be straight up a big red octopus, but there are indeed red octopi, and octopi can change their colors based off their environments, or to blend into other environments, so there's nothing wrong with that. But what is interesting from Japanese culture standpoint is that what they're going with Octavian, I'm going to say Octavian, is that he actually is based off of a Japanese food. Rather, what they tend to do is, this is actually pretty cute. So what's kind of fun to do is to actually take food and to cut it into a shape of a popular character or something. In this case, if you've ever been as a kid and maybe your mom cut your sandwich into the shape of a Mickey Mouse head, or maybe she drew a smiley face in ketchup on something, this is kind of like that, except to a slightly higher degree. What they actually do is they'll take pieces of sausage and they'll actually cut it at the bottom to make it look like it has tentacles, and it will look like an octopi, which is actually kind of what they did with Octavian here. So it's interesting, rather than being based off of just a regular octopus, they actually went ahead and they designed Octavian after a snack food as well, which also makes sense. I think Marina might be based off of a candy, but there's Zucker. First off, Zucker, in design, it kind of looks like Mark Zuckerberg, which I think is honestly a pretty funny pun in itself. But Zucker is really interesting because if Octavian is based off of a sausage, Zucker is clearly based off of a Japanese yakisoba. So yakisoba is a Japanese dish that quite typically, if I was to explain it, comparing it to an American hush puppy, but instead stuffed with usually meat, and probably not as sweet. But yakisoba is basically a octopus ball, a fried octopus ball, which looks and tastes amazing. But Zucker basically has a similar body to Octavian, except his head pretty much looked like it was deep fried, and where he has freckles are actually more like chives or game. Because like I said, I enjoy culture. I think some of these things can be really funny. I think these are great. Talking about some more real life inspirations, the ostrich villagers, because again, birds are divided by certain species. They did something interesting with the ostriches, is that they sort of divided these up by body types instead. So we have basic ostriches. We even have, for some reason, a robot named Sprocket, which is definitely interesting. I hope I get to see him in my game. But we have a couple other birds that don't quite fit in the ostrich category, but rather have a body type similar to an ostrich. For example, a peacock named Julia, which peacocks are definitely not the same as an ostrich, but rather they are birds that have usually longer necks or longer legs. But obviously she's played very cute, as of most of these birds, whereas some of the other ostriches have definitely the simple ostrich features, usually the body shape and the plumage feathers on the tail. But there are a couple others that fall into this category, such as Flora, a flamingo, which I have talked about flamingos, and basically flamingos, if you didn't know, flamingos are pink, not exclusively because of that's the color they are, but also because a lot of the proteins they consume do give their foliage and give their pigment a pink color. Things like shrimp and brine usually give them that kind of color. So what you eat... and it's just pretty interesting. We even have some quails as well, which, fun fact, the quail, who is actually a nice blue and red color, is named Phil, which makes sense because a lot of times birds that have a lot of the different colors on them are usually the male ones, which is always a really fun fact to me because Pokemon did something very similar with a Pokemon called Unfezant. The males are very decorative, while the females have a more bland and brown design because males have to attract mates rather than females. So I always love that detail whenever games are able to get that across. Now, I have also mentioned a good bit about the fun of the collecting process of wild animals and just really how fun that can be. If you've ever taken up something like fishing, then you know that it's a game of patience and a game of determination. There are skills to it. Animal Crossing also does have something similar to that with their fishing, where it all depends on your angle and also how patient you can be, because while a fish usually can just nibble, sometimes you have to wait. You're very quick to jitter, which is pretty realistic to real fishing, aside from not having to deal with worms and bait. Animal Crossing is a game that I didn't really expect to get so much out of such a simple game, but it really does have a lot, especially in the animal process. The real-world influences to the fun exploration, and especially the care of nature and things like that. And I definitely want to get into some more lore in a little while, but I just want to say how interesting this is when it comes to these characters and how silly the game really is. And especially while we're in such a difficult time right now, I think it's the kind of game a lot of people could really use, especially if you're an animal fan. Whether you're an old gamer or maybe you're a new up-and-coming gamer, if you like animals, if you like nature, Animal Crossing is a great way to go if you want to get to explore without having to disturb nature or put yourself at harm right now. I highly recommend it. You know me, I'm a nerd. I'm going to recommend nerdy things, but it does fascinate me when games are able to do things like this. But unfortunately, we're going to have to take a quick moment for my fascination to go ahead and do some quick messages. So if you want to hang tight, and when we come back, we'll talk about some interesting lore and factoids of Animal Crossing. So please, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast, the show that gives you advice on everything travel. We explore places you've always wanted to go, as well as giving tips for traveling in those places. We'll give you advice on the best sites for travel tips, information, and discounts. Join us as we travel the world, explore cultures, and meet new people. The Golden State Media Concepts Travel Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Travel Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Alright guys, we are back. I hope you've been enjoying yourself as we're talking more about the game Animal Crossing, its real-world influences, and just some of the fun things you may not have known. So, more animal villagers that you might get the chance to run into when playing this game are the wolf villagers. And there are actually quite a few wolf villagers, about 10 of them, which is a pretty large number considering. And there are some interesting characteristics about them, some of which have pretty simple ones, such as a silver wolf, a brown wolf, nothing too special. But then we actually do have a couple more interesting ones, such as a dark grayish wolf, which actually does seem to take after the North American wolves as well. And what's actually different about the wolves is that they actually have a lot of varying eye styles and specifically their patterns of their fur, which are reminiscent of a lot of real-world wolves and how some of them have different sort of pack mentalities. They're also one of the more varied in size wolf animals as well. A lot of these animals do actually have some habits of, pulling in more fancy, quirky designs. I think the squirrels are definitely one of the more bigger culprits of that. Some of them coming in green, pink, purple. But there's actually a fair amount of them that do have a lot of, real-world influences as brown squirrels, white squirrels, and sort of a reddish squirrel, which actually is a real type of squirrel. It's not purely red, but it's like a really light brown that comes off as a red. I believe this is the kind you'd find more in North America, like way North America. But they're very interesting. There are even some squirrels that have sort of a blackish, dark purple-y, blue color, which is actually a real type of squirrel as well. And these actually do take place, in this game. This is actually very realistic. But since we are kind of on the topic of marsupials, I did want to talk about one of the main characters of the game, or rather, one of the characters you'll see very frequently. So, like I said, this game does have a lot of Japanese influence, and one of the biggest influences of the game is actually Tom Nook. Tom Nook being a tanuki. Of course, you might see it as just simply a raccoon, but a tanuki is actually a type of specific animal in Japan, a tanuki dog, which is basically like a raccoon dog. So it's a similar type of raccoon. But what's interesting is that tanuki are very, very prevalent in Japan, as both a myth and legend, with a lot of different origins, facts, and stuff behind it that can take up a whole episode. But I'm going to try condensing it, and really try to give you the basics of it. Now, one thing about raccoons that are interesting, specifically tanukis, is that they are believed to be magical. That they're protectors, but that they're also very mischievous. And one thing that's pretty interesting is that they are believed to have the ability to transform. Now, if you have actually played an Animal Crossing game or know anything about Animal Crossing media, then you might know that a lot of times items, specifically furniture, takes the appearance of a leaf. And leaves are very prominent in Animal Crossing, along with sort of transformations. And by transformations, I mean that your character, let's just say they want to change clothes or they want to, do something specific. Things just sort of appear out of thin air, and it's described as, it's coming out of their pocket. But this actually is very reminiscent to the belief that raccoons, specifically tanuki, had the ability to transform and would transform or poof things out of air to suit their needs, to mess with humans or to adapt into the real world. And it was also believed that tanuki would have a leaf that they would transform into other items as well. So the fact that a lot of things, such as if you go to anywhere from Tom Nook, anything he has, his logo is usually a leaf because he's a tanuki. Tanuki have the ability to transform items. So, that's why you're able to carry things like a dresser or a large lava lamp or a bed in your pocket because it transforms into a leaf because Tom Nook is a tanuki. Very fun and very fascinating. Now, something interesting that I just learned myself is that along with the tanuki, one of the few type of animals that you don't get as a villager is a fox. Now, foxes in Japanese culture are known as kitsune. Kitsune are believed to be very similar to tanuki in the sense that they're both tricksters, that they are able to transform, do very similar things. However, they're also believed to be somewhat rivals. Now, I just learned this pretty recently, but apparently in the Animal Crossing lore, the character of Tom Nook had a rival who is a kitsune, who actually did things a lot more trickily and actually did swindle you, the player, out of money. So having that established rivalry between Tanuki and Kitsune is very fascinating to me. Knowing that there are some real-world legends and mythology thrown into games like that, and how animals can have different representation outside of just simply their animals. They have significance in culture. I think here in America we do have some animals that do things like that as well. Primarily why we have cartoon characters who are animals who do very quirky things, or who are capable of, transcending. I mean, after all, I guess the closest thing we have is someone like Mickey Mouse, who, mice aren't able to speak, wear gloves, or able to do a lot of, magical things, but yet somehow this cartoon character makes us believe that. So in my opinion, it's somewhat along those lines, but also more in a fantastical lore setting. So that's just kind of interesting how much that influences the game, and something a lot of people don't seem to notice. Along with Tom Nook being sort of a businessman who basically people see him as a bad guy because he makes you have to pay back a lot of money. Tanukis are also believed to trick with money. They're believed to, transform leaves into money, which is a fairly common prank or fairly common myth. But it's really interesting how that kind of thing can transcend into media, that all it takes is one character, one legend to just simply last itself long enough for us to have that. And I mean, I think America has, such as cats have 9 lives, that cats were treated as gods in ancient Egypt, and then we sort of have that kind of legend as well. And that's kind of the interesting perspective of how we view certain animals. The bald eagle is the symbol of American freedom, and that's like a majestic, magical bird, but it's not. It's very interesting to what has been translated into media, and why media is pretty important for how we view certain creatures. Because just like that, in media, we also believe that black crows or black cats are evil, when in reality they're not. That's just, again, more superstitions and media putting that idea, when in reality, a lot of these creatures are just as curious, loving, and if not, maybe even nicer than some of the other creatures that we put priority over. But that's because of lack of knowledge and sometimes even pandemics. But this game itself does really help with a lot of that because of how deep of a lore there can be. I mean, what other type of game can you have an owl that talks and talks and talks and teaches you about dinosaur facts or bug facts or fish facts, and also builds you a whole museum for free? It's honestly really amazing, and it does give me more of an interest in learning about animals, and really makes me want to go outside and start dipping my fishing rod into the lake behind my house and just be like, yeah, I wonder what kind of fish I'll come up with. Can I make a fun pun later? But then I remember how much work goes into fishing, and it kind of takes a whole day, and then I'm like, I might just go and talk to Blathers again. But no, it does make me really want to look at more animals. I mean, myself, I got to see some pretty cool stuff. I saw a fish jump out of the water just earlier today because I just took a moment to sit down, just like in the game. So the game really does help pique your curiosity. And I believe that media can be a great tool to teach and show just how expansive the world can be culture-wise and through nature and etymology in so many ways, and I highly encourage it. But we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be rounding everything off and just sort of going on about how great nature really is and why you should take some time right now while you have the opportunity. But until then, please stay tuned for these messages, and we'll be right back.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So thankful you guys have stuck around today. Today we are talking about the video game series Animal Crossing, its influences inspired from real world culture, and a lot of the goings ins and outs of the game and what I want to share with today. So I've talked about how the characters of Animal Crossing are inspired by real world animals and how there's a lot of back and forth between it all, along with a lot of the inspiration from the culture in Japan and around the world as well, and just how fun the series really is. What I personally love about it is how it encourages exploration, about how basically it teaches you to go outside and sort of see the world and do good and basically make your town look a little bit prettier, which is very important because while we have the ability to explore the world and to know more about how nature thrives, what's good for it, there's actually a larger message behind it too. One of the big things you do out in this game is you pick up trash, you fish out junk from the rivers, you dig up dirt, you dig up stuff, and you plant. You basically help keep your town looking great. One game you were the mayor and you had to run everything and make sure the town was running well. Other games you're just a villager living your life and trying to have a good time and just move in and basically be the big shot. But in this one, you're on an island adventure, you're on vacation, but even then, you're still treating things right. And that's very important. There've been a lot of false rumors about how humans are not out in the streets in some areas, hence it's being better for the environment. To an extent, that is true. It actually has proven that because there are less people driving and a lot less happening, pollution has gone down just a bit. Which is definitely good, but along with that, saying that humans aren't disturbing the environment as much, so fish are returning. Unfortunately, that one has been a hoax, but what isn't a hoax is that when we stop and take a moment to take a look at everything going on, to look at where we are and notice our impact on a lot of things, the good we can do and what we do take away and what we bring is definitely important. And that's something that I have taken away from this game is how we affect the environment. I would think, man, that's so dumb. I can't believe instead of pulling out a fish, I just pulled out an old boot or a can, which would seem dumb and almost cheap. But then the fact that afterwards we can use a lot of those items and repurpose them is like, oh, recycling, I get it. Well, that's actually a pretty fun way of doing that. It's more achievement, but at the same time, it's pretty simple for us as people to do stuff like that too. We leave so much trash and dirt behind that it does affect the natural wildlife, and if you leave those things there, eventually things get grosser, things get more dirty, there's less for us to explore because the animals aren't able to thrive anymore. And that's sort of the magic of the world we live in, is that, we don't have to live in a world where animals, we have to search for animals. Sometimes they'll be there. They'll be in places that we would expect them to be because we let them thrive. And that's good. because we spent a lot of time already about how fun it is to explore, how fun it is to fish, how fun it is to pick up bugs. But what about how fun it is to actually keep the world, healthy, to make sure we're doing good and giving back? I mean, there's nothing wrong with planting a tree or, maybe digging up some weeds. I mean, sometimes that's a really simple thing we can do. I know that for myself, I actually do take time to also grow a few plants here or there, simply because I find some joy in that, and also because it does give back a little bit to the environment, especially plants that can grow very quickly and easily in most climates. It does give some time to help add something back, and I take that plant afterwards and I pass it back around. And it's good for the animals too, because the more that things start to be added back, if you plant one tree in your backyard or in a park or something, then it does add a little bit more to the environment that we've already taken away for those areas. It gives animals more places to thrive, ergo it gives more places for animals to feel safe, to perch, more birds to come back, more squirrels to enjoy the areas we have. And that's sort of a fun message about Animal Crossing. It's not just about having a fun time and making friends, but also about how to keep your land well maintained, to remove unnecessary things, to not overdevelop, and to also live a happy life. That's kind of the subtext the game tries to thrive. Unlike, say, Pokemon, which is mainly about collect them all, battle them all, and see what you can get, who's the strongest. This is about, okay, I'm going to live my best life, make money, keep things clean, and also just sort of do better in life, and also make sure I keep the world a little bit cleaner. I mean, heck, one of the biggest things you can do is take fruit from one island and go visit a friend and give them fruit. It's not exactly a tricky thing. I could go pick some oranges and then go bring them to my friend's house if I wanted to. But it's the mechanics of it that make it more fun. Animals will live and thrive very easily if given the chance. And it's kind of why I like the theme of Animal Crossing, because, I mean, animals will thrive. Animals will do well. They have their own personalities just like people. I mean, at the beginning of this episode, we talked about that one dog who just happened to sneak into an open bottle of jelly or open jar of jelly and ate the whole thing, and it was such a sweet and cute thing. It makes me laugh when I think about it, but it's not just the personalities we miss out on, but we'll also miss out on the opportunities. We'll miss out on the environments given because we've taken away so much. And it is nice to really say, hey, here's some of the good we can do. Here's what it feels like to do good. Hopefully it's a nice taste for people to then encourage them to do a little bit more as well. It's never a lot of hard work, and sometimes a little work isn't bad either. But sometimes we have to know when it's time to give back, so that way we can have those moments to explore, to see those unique animals. And maybe one day, if you help take care of the world more, you get to see some more of those creative or unique animals that we've talked about. Maybe you will get to see a narwhal one day, or maybe you will get to see a poison dart frog from a safe distance if the world stays clean enough. It just means that all you really have to do is make sure that you aren't taking more than you need, that you are taking care of your local areas, your local communities, make things a little bit prettier. Because honestly, don't you want a pretty environment? Don't you want a pretty neighborhood or a pretty town? Little things you can do. And it's just little things you do that can make a difference. When people see you start making a difference, they start to make a difference too. That's another big theme of the game, is that people tend to follow you as you make good decisions. So whatever decisions you start to make, people start to follow back. And people will notice that the more things start to happen. That's always a very valid, topic to discuss, and not always an easy one either. But we can do very simple things that would honestly make big differences if we got on the road, if we got on it. I know recycling is such a in and out topic, but it's not that complicated. But it's little things like that, making sure that we do throw away our trash, that we sort stuff like that, every so often a lot of trash needs to be picked up, that we do plant some more trees, that we take care of those open areas, that we definitely respect the environments that we don't naturally go to. Because the more we disrespect those environments, the more likely the animals will notice, and then they'll disappear or they'll suffer. It's not a lot, but it is little things we can do now. Especially right now while we are confined and we don't really have anywhere to go or don't have anything to mess up. It's simple to make a change right now. And just to hopefully keep healthy, because, if the world isn't healthy, we aren't healthy. And if we aren't healthy, then we don't do well. And it's the same thing for animals. They need to be healthy to do well too. But regardless, I'd like to thank you all for listening today. This has been the GSMC Pets Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you like what you heard today, it would be really great if you subscribed and leave a comment. That definitely helps us out a lot. And if you really like, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to keep up with us on everything we got going on. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day, guys.
You've been listening to the GSMC Pets Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's podcast.